The Titanic was sinking under the weight of its own ego long before it hit the ice. It was a museum of vanity where aesthetics were worth more than lives, where lifeboats were removed just to save the view. This is the story of the floating debt trap, how the world's most expensive luxury became the physical anchor that dragged an entire era to the bottom. Welcome to Luxury Historian, where luxury, status symbols, and power set the rules, but every shine hides a cost. Southampton, April 10th, 1912. The world's biggest ship isn't just carrying passengers, it's transporting the entire soul of the Gilded Age. This is a floating vault, an epicenter of ego that has concentrated the world's wealth into a single fragile point. The cargo holds aren't filled with coal and grain alone. They contain millions in insured treasures, rare manuscripts, Egyptian artifacts, and a brand new Renault car. These are Veblen goods, objects whose value lies solely in the fact that they are out of reach for everyone else. This was more than a ship. It was a museum of vanity. Every trunk loaded onto the deck was a brick in a monument of status that the world believed was too heavy to sink. Listen to the silence before the storm. A gentleman in a top hat pulls out a gold pocket watch. He clicks it open and synchronizes it with Southampton time. The steady, delicate tick, tick, tick of the golden gears is the heartbeat of a world that thinks it has conquered time itself. Then the sound morphs into the deep, rhythmic thrum of the massive steam engines. The countdown has begun. The unsinkable mirage was setting sail, carrying a manifest of vanity that was destined to become the most expensive collection of junk on the ocean floor. If you looked at the Titanic's cargo manifest, you wouldn't think you were reading a shipping log. You'd think you were looking at the inventory of a royal palace. This was the peak of wealth accumulation, where the elite didn't just own objects, they worshipped them. Deep in the hold sat the Great Omar, a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, bound in turquoise leather and encrusted with over 1,000 precious gemstones. Next to it, crates of exotic birds, rare orchids, and enough vintage champagne to fill a swimming pool. This is commodity fetishism at its most extreme, luxury as a deadweight that exists only to prove you can afford to lose it. To the 1%, these weren't just goods. They were talismans of power. They believed that if they surrounded themselves with enough rare objects, they became as untouchable and permanent as the diamonds themselves. Look at the ink on the page. The manifest lists 50 cases of dragon's blood, 800 cases of shelled walnuts, and 1 jeweled manuscript. The list goes on for pages, a staggering catalog of vanity. It wasn't a cargo for a journey, it was a cargo for an afterlife. They were loading the ship as if it were a Pharaoh's tomb, unaware that for many, that's exactly what it would become. But the real weight of the Titanic wasn't in the hold. It was in the social structure built into the very steel of the ship, a hierarchy designed to keep the diamonds dry and the coal dust damp. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a vertical map of the Edwardian soul. Its architecture was a physical manifestation of class stratification, where a person's value was determined by how many decks they lived above the waterline. On the upper decks, life was a floating replica of the London Ritz, all Georgian mahogany and silk wallpaper. But this world of elegance was only possible because of the rigid isolation of the world below. This was social Darwinism cast in steel, the belief that the fittest deserved the sun, while the rest were fuel for the journey. Luxury, in its purest form, isn't just about what you have, it's about what you are kept away from. The first-class passengers didn't just pay for caviar, they paid for the iron gates that kept the smell of the boiler rooms and the sight of the poor from reaching their dinner tables. Follow the camera as it dives. It starts on a massive crystal chandelier in the first-class dining saloon, sparkling with 1,000 electric stars. Then it drops straight down through the velvet floors, through the engine rooms, down to the black gang. Here in the belly of the beast, soot-covered men shovel coal into roaring orange furnaces. The heat is unbearable. The air is thick with dust, and the roar of the fire is the only music they hear. The diamonds at the top only shine because of the darkness at the bottom. The hierarchy felt as solid as the hull. But as the Titanic cut through the freezing dark, The elite were preparing for a performance of identity that would soon meet its final, icy audience. The grand staircase wasn't designed for movement, it was designed for observation. It was the social runway of the North Atlantic, a gilded stage where the world's most powerful people performed the ultimate performance of identity. To descend these stairs at dinner time was a ritual of confirmation. Every diamond tiara and every custom-tailored tuxedo was a signal. I belong here. In this world, luxury was the only language that mattered, and the cost was staggering. A single evening gown worn on these steps could cost more than a third-class family would earn in a lifetime. Wealth. Here wasn't just accumulated, it was worn as armor against the common world. Close your eyes and listen to the ghost of the room. You hear the rhythmic shush-shush of heavy silk dragging across the carpet. You see the flash of 1,000 diamonds under the electric lamps that were a miracle of technology in 1912. The air is thick with expensive French perfume and the smoke of Havana cigars. They are at the height of their glory, standing under the great clock that carves out the final hours of their world. The lights are bright, but the shadow of the iceberg is already reaching for the glass dome. The stage was set, and the actors were perfect. But the obsession with the look of power had already created a fatal flaw in the ship's design, one that the ocean was about to exploit. The tragedy of the Titanic was not an act of God, it was an act of design. The belief that the ship was unsinkable was the ultimate technological hubris, the dangerous conviction that human luxury had finally outpaced the laws of nature. Why were there only 20 lifeboats for 2,200 people? It was not just to save money. It was a spectacular risk assessment failure driven by aesthetics. The White Star Line executives felt that rows of bulky wooden boats would clutter the deck and ruin the breathtaking ocean views for the first-class passengers. Safety was seen as ugly. It was a reminder of mortality that the elite did not want to face while sipping their sherry. On the Titanic, the visual experience of wealth was literally prioritized over the mechanical necessity of survival. Look closely at the promenade deck. There is a wide, empty space where a cluster of lifeboats should have been bolted to the deck, but instead of a vessel designed to save 70 lives, there sits a single elegant wicker lounging chair. A steward has placed a wool blanket on it, ready for a billionaire to enjoy the breeze. The space meant for survival has been sold for comfort. They traded their exit strategy for a better sunset. While the passengers enjoyed their unobstructed views, a different kind of excess was being prepared in the kitchens. As the iceberg drifted into their path, the 1% were sitting down to the most expensive distraction of their lives. April 14, 1912. The final meal in the first-class dining saloon was not just dinner, it was an 11-course marathon of excess. While the Titanic sped through the dark, the elite were insulated by a wall of silver, crystal, and French cuisine. This is the perfect example of hedonic adaptation. When luxury becomes your baseline, you lose the ability to sense friction or threat. To these passengers, a world this perfect felt indestructible. They were so comfortable that their biological instincts for danger had been replaced by a taste for caviar and mint sauce. The menu was a catalogue of the Belle Epoque's appetite. Oysters, consomme Olga, poached salmon, filet mignon, and Calvados glazed duckling. It was a feast designed to numb the senses, not sharpen them. Look into the reflection of a silver spoon. It is held by John Jacob Astor IV, the richest man on the ship. In the polished curve of the silver, his face is perfectly calm, distorted only by the elegance of the room. He is discussing real estate and the future of the 20th century, unaware that a mountain of ice is only minutes away. The spoon doesn't tremble. The wine in the crystal glass is perfectly still. The elite were so busy changing courses that they didn't notice the world was about to change its axis. The 11 courses were finished, the cigars were lit, and then a faint, grinding shudder vibrated through the hull. The crystal began to sing, and the icy finally met the ego. When the iceberg struck, it didn't sound like a catastrophe. It sounded like a heavy silk curtain being torn. The elite had lived in a bubble of safety for so long that they literally could not process the arrival of reality. This was a lethal display of loss aversion. Psychologically, the first-class passengers were so anchored to their possessions and the warmth of their palace that they refused to leave. To step out onto a cold, dark deck meant abandoning their comfort, and their brains chose the illusion of safety over the reality of survival. While the lower decks were already fighting for air, the upper decks were still complaining about the interruption of their drinks. They didn't realize that the crystal was already doomed by the ice. Listen to the sound of the end. It starts with a single, sharp clink, a piece of fine bone china falling onto the floor of an empty restaurant. Then the silence is broken by the rush of freezing black Atlantic water. It pours over carpets that cost a fortune, turning deep crimson velvet into a sodden, dark mess. The water doesn't care about the thread count or the craftsmanship. It is the great equalizer dissolving the boundaries of status as it fills the rooms. The palace is becoming a cage. The unsinkable was dying. But even as the ship tilted toward the abyss, the obsession with wealth held some in its grip until the very last second. In the final moments of the Titanic, a strange and deadly phenomenon occurred. When the order came to abandon ship, many of the elite didn't run for the lifeboats. They ran back down, deeper into the flooding darkness, to find their safes. This was the peak of material obsession. For the Edwardian elite, their identity was so tied to their possessions that they couldn't imagine a life without them. To lose the family diamonds or the jeweled manuscripts was a social death they feared more than the freezing Atlantic. Wealth became a physical anchor. Men filled their pockets with gold sovereigns and heavy watches, items that would only drag them down faster once they hit the water. They were literally weighted down by their own success. Look at the tragedy of a tragedy within a tragedy. In one of the half-empty lifeboats, a woman sits wrapped in a cork lifebelt. She isn't looking at the sinking ship or calling for her husband who stayed behind. She is staring at her empty hands, weeping hysterically because she left her pearl necklace in the cabin. In that moment, the glitter of the past was more real to her than the survival of the future. The luxury hadn't just decorated her life, it had consumed her soul. As the Titanic's stern rose toward the stars, the jewelry boxes snapped shut forever. The era of excess was drowning, and the world that would surface the next morning would be unrecognizable. The sinking of the Titanic wasn't just a maritime disaster, it was the funeral of the Belle Epoque. In the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, the long, sun-drenched Edwardian summer came to a violent, icy end. This was the ultimate paradigmatic shift. Before 1912, the world believed that technology and wealth made them invincible. After 1912, that innocence was gone. The Titanic became a tomb for an entire philosophy of life, one where status was permanent and progress was inevitable. 2 years later, the same families who danced on the Titanic's grand staircase would see their world burn in the trenches of World War I. The age of carefree, excessive luxury was over. The survivors realized that no matter how much gold you carry, the ocean and history always has the final word. Watch the final lights of the ship. As the Titanic slips beneath the waves, the electric lights flicker deep underwater, glowing with an eerie, fading brilliance. They look like the dying candles at a Romanov ball, tiny sparks of a vanishing world struggling against an encroaching darkness. The unsinkable has become a memory, a ghost of a summer that will never return. The party is over and the lights are out. The era of the Edwardian giants was buried 2 miles down. But as we look at the ruins of the past, we have to ask, have we really learned the lesson, or are we just building bigger ships? The Titanic didn't just sink in 1912, it is sinking every day in our modern world. We haven't outgrown the Edwardian era's obsession with status, we've just scaled it up. This is the reality of modern inequality. Today we build unsinkable digital empires, private space stations, and yachts larger than the Titanic itself. Each one is a monument to an ego that believes it can outrun reality. While we polish our screens and curate our gilded lives, we often ignore the icebergs of our time, the environmental and economic shifts that no amount of gold can stop. Luxury remains the most beautiful way to ignore catastrophe. We are still sitting at the 11-course dinner, distracted by the shimmer of the silver, while the hull of our world begins to groan. Look at the glowing screen in your hand. It is a miracle of technology, more powerful than everything on the Titanic. But watch as it slips from a hand and falls into the dark, silent water. The screen glows for a second, showing a photo of a perfect life, and then blackness. The ocean doesn't care about your followers or your net worth. It only cares about the truth. The price of grandeur is high, but the price of denial is everything. If you want to see the cracks in the gold before it's too late, join us. Subscribe to Luxury Historian. We reveal why the most beautiful dreams often lead to the deepest shipwrecks. The Titanic sank in a single night of hubris, but centuries earlier, an entire empire committed a slow, golden suicide. Before the Edwardian elite traded safety for crystal, the Spanish Empire traded its future for the gold of the Americas. To see how the richest nation on earth managed to go bankrupt 9 times while owning all the world's silver, watch our investigation into the Spanish Empire. The ice was just the beginning, and the gold was the real trap.